Welcome back. This is the Intel on eNCA. Now, let's continue. We're in conversation with the CEO of Sassa, Totsi Memela-Khambula, and Brenda, the Deputy Director General at the Department of Social Development, who is responsible for social security. Ladies, thank you for coming through. So you're coming off the, basically, not to be too triumphant about it, but you've had a bit of good news, haven't you, from the World Bank. Just tell me what it is that the World Bank has said about your, the country's social security services. Let's start with the CEO, just giving us a sense. What are the main takeouts for you?
I think the main takeouts for us is that the system is working in terms of enabling access to social grants for people that deserve the social grants, and also the fact that the impact that the social grant system is having is alleviating poverty. And actually, because as a country we've had unemployment for so many years, it does create some kind of buffer for our people. It also impacts on child food security, because without it, I think there'll be dire situation for our people. So in that regard, I think it gives us a bit of a breather, but also creates a huge opportunities for us on things that we can improve, particularly with regards to the system. I think Brenda can talk to the policy issues. Yes,
absolutely, and I'll bring her in just a moment, but I want to stick with you for a moment. Does this report tell us anything we didn't know already in terms of whether or not there's a dent being made against, what we neatly call the triple challenges: unemployment, inequality, and poverty? Does it tell us anything we didn't know?
It's things that we did know, because what we've started doing is, in terms of looking at our data, we look at our data also in terms of the district development model to say what is the impact in each and every district in terms of people that we support. Because as we know, our offices are actually based in local offices, and we work together with municipalities to make sure that we understand at municipality level and at district level as to what impact we have. And in some districts, you find that about 30 to 45% of people, of communities, actually live on grants. So it does have a major grant, a dent, and indicates things that we knew, but I know that we can definitely do better.
Deputy Director General Brenda, Sibeko, your big takeouts for you? I mean, you said from the policy side of things, yes, in guiding that, perhaps this is the line of thinking, this is what we can do better. And the CEO and her team sit on the side of things that says, well, this is where the sausage is made. This is the implementation part of things. Just your big takeouts for you in terms of this policy. Some would say it's a vindication of the policies that have been taken by government in the last 27 years or so around social security.
Exactly. I think for us, the big takeout is what you're saying. The fact that the policy is correct in that we are alleviating poverty. That's the intent, in line with that constitutional mandate you just spoke about. So we are addressing the needs of those who are unable to support themselves in terms of the Constitution, because it has done an assessment of who's benefiting, and the people that are benefiting are the ones at the lowest income levels. The lowest two deciles are the majority of the people that are benefiting from the grants, which means we are meeting the target, and that's key. But in addition to that, the implementation of it, we of course know that Sassa is the implementer. The fact that they are able, through their systems, through the mechanisms that have been put in place, to reach those targets is vindication of the systems that we have developed. Although they do point to some challenges that we need to address in relation to the integration of our social grants with other poverty alleviation interventions. We are doing that. We've started to do that now, particularly with COVID. So even in that one, it reflects something that we already know. We've already been intending to create a national social security information system. And when COVID happened, it became more urgent for us to do that. and Sassa has started to put together mechanisms to try and interact with other social security information databases to be able to make sure that we are reaching the people that we need to reach. So it confirms that also that the policy intent to move in that direction is correct, although the pace at which we've been doing it has not been what we wanted to do, and so we need to fast track that.
What's your best response, if I stick with you, DDG, what's your best response to when South Africans, segments of society, criticize government and the various agencies, including Sassa, and say, well, here we go. You've found another reason now. You're going to cite this World Bank report to keep South Africans dependent on the government. Just place that neatly for me within the context of, you know, that criticism as well as the reality that some people in our society will always need some kind of social protection, hence that provision in the Constitution.
I will say two things, Thulasizwe. One is we emerged from a certain kind of history in this country of poverty. The reason we have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution is to address that legacy of deep structural poverty. So this is not something that's going to be fixed in 2 years' time. It takes a long time, and we are on track to do that. But with regards to the actual provision of the grants, there are also other interventions that are in place in the country to reduce the number of people that are living only on grants. But we all know that this country, we know in the country that our employment history has not been something to be happy about. We've not succeeded in creating the number of jobs and the quality of jobs that the country needs to create in order for people to be able to live on their own means and just sell their labor and live only on that. So that being the case, and COVID having worsened that, we do need to make sure that we are allowing people to be able to have something to eat. The levels of the grants, if you look at the amounts, are not very high. They're not, I mean, the child support grant, for example, is not even reaching the food poverty line of the country. So there is an expectation in the way that the funding has occurred, the funding is provided, that people must be able to find other means to augment what the government gives, because it's not enough to live on. So there is a balance to be found between giving people a hand to assist them, but also saying you need to find ways to augment that. But in the current context of very high levels of unemployment, there's this gap then of people who are able-bodied, should be able to find work and support themselves, but the economy has not enabled them to be able to do that. So that's a gap that even the World Bank identifies as something that we need to address. So, yeah.
Totsi Memela-Khambula, so we emerge then from this report as some of the biggest spenders in the world. I believe we're number 10 in the world in terms of spending on social assistance, and fourth in sub-Saharan Africa. Which of these grants are found to have, you know, a really big impact? And I imagine that, you know, when you receive a grant, you really need it. There are instances where people apply for grants that they don't need out of, you know, corruption and greed, etc. But the vast majority of people who will apply are people who need it to put food on the table. So which ones of these grants do we find to be high performers in giving us value for our money?
I can't think of any that is actually not having a major positive impact. The biggest, the grant that I think has an impact on people that really, really need it is that one of persons with disabilities and the grant for the elderly. I think with the mothers, if they had opportunities for them to be able to have jobs, it therefore means that they would go and fend for their children. What we found is that there's been an increase in the child support grant because of the number of mothers that have actually lost jobs. And I think it doesn't mean that it doesn't have impact, because I know families whereby they have nothing else, but they live on the child. Hence, you can find instances where the child says, well, it's my money because the grant is my grant. And the children know that they do get support from government. So I can't think of any grant that I can say doesn't have a positive impact in the lives of the people that we provide.
What about coverage? Which areas of the population, which segments are best covered? We will turn to the criticism that comes out from the report in a moment around working age South Africans who are poor, who need some kind of a grant. But for a moment, let's talk about which segments of society are well covered.
I think the majority are well covered. The ones that I continue to be concerned about is the children less than 1 year old, because in terms of that one, there's particular provinces where we're not having as much coverage that we should be having, particularly in Western Cape and in Gauteng. And I think the opportunity we have there is to actually work with the health system and to work with Department of Home Affairs, so that as the child is born, we can then make an assessment and see as to who are those people that are needy and make sure that we can provide that. Even though a lot of ground has been covered with regards to that particular segment of children, I think more needs to be done on our side to make sure that, again, we integrate the systems with other government entities to make sure that we make it easy. We have since established or developed a online system so that mothers, for example, don't necessarily have to come with children that are less than 10 days old for them to apply for a grant, that they can be able to do it at home. But again, the issue of data and the cost of data in the country does create a complication for them. The ones that are not covered are obviously the people, the people between 18 and 59. Hence, the 350 has created a huge opportunity for that segment of people that was not covered at all.
And I'll pull at that thread a bit more, because I think it's one of the more pointed, I don't know if it's a criticism or an observation that is not necessarily one that you would necessarily want to celebrate at the moment. Let's put it that way for now. Brenda, Sibeko, does the question of sustainability come to your mind as the DDG responsible for this area of work in the department when you read the World Bank report?
Yes, I constantly have to be dealing with the question of, is this thing sustainable? But there's two ways to look at sustainability. One is the money metric. Can the country as a whole afford it? In that regard, I can say the World Bank says we are spending 3.3% of the country's GDP. That is the statistic that has stayed for the past decade or so. So on average, irrespective of what the economy was doing, we have maintained it at that sort of level of 3.3%. So if we want to talk sustainability, it has, as the economy goes down or up, we stayed there. So from that perspective, I would say it is sustainable. The challenge, though, is the numbers of people who need it has been growing. The way that the fiscal decision makers have dealt with it is by saying the increases that we put in will not be as high as, basically either just at inflation or even below. So in that sense, that's how the sustainability, at least the affordability question, has been addressed from the fiscal perspective. But I think it's also important to think about it from the perspective of, as poverty grows, as more people get poor, can the country afford? Is it sustainable to not give income? Is it sustainable to reduce the income that you are giving to people who actually are not able to earn an income for themselves through, for example, labor market access because of the poor performance of our labor market? So it's a balancing act that we need to do. It's not only about money, it's also about the nature of the society that you want to create. Do you want a decent society where people actually have something to eat, or do you want a society where everybody begs in the street and have nothing to eat? So it's also that consideration that I think is important. So from that perspective, we have to not only rely on grants, of course, we must, as a nation, not just the government and not just the Department of Social Development and not just the departments that are responsible for social protection, but even the economic cluster of the country needs to do much more work in terms of finding ways of creating job opportunities, creating other ways for people to be able to learn, to start businesses. That whole area of social enterprise, job creation mechanisms, all of that needs to be raised up quite a lot more. And we also need to find ways of making sure that Sassa, which is a really, really fantastic institution, in that it is able to touch the lives of people at the very district, local level, to use that institutional muscle to look at other mechanisms to link people, those grant beneficiaries, to other opportunities so that they augment and then they raise their own
Right.
standard of living.
All right,
so that's the issue.
Let's pause there for a moment, and some of what you've touched on, Ms. Sibeko, raises such debates as the whole issue around the basic income grant, right? I must say, for my part, when I heard President Ramaphosa mention it unprovoked, I thought, wow, this is a big moment, because previously it would have been from civil society saying we need a basic income grant, and government would be a bit reluctant to enter that space. So I'll tease out that with you in just a moment. You're watching the Intel, and I'm in conversation with the CEO of Sassa, that's Totsi Memela-Khambula, as well as the DDG from the Department of Social Development, Brenda. We're coming back in just a moment.